Undiplomatic is an unscripted and unfiltered podcast hosted by Hyatt-Khan that will explore the intersection of business, politics and culture in Slovakia with a host of high-level guests across the spectrum telling their stories.
The world's reaching a pretty critical time. There's some extraordinary migration laws happening. People who are trying migrant routes into different countries are being treated in very inhospitable manners. So I don't think there's anywhere we can look that says, well, this is how we should be.
The thing with the migration crisis today, I do see that countries have a right to control their borders, and at one point when there's too much of a population that's not integrated, they can say, hey, we need to slow this down. We need to give time for this community to integrate, and that maybe takes 10 years, maybe more, maybe less.
Do you believe you owe your country something in return just for being born?
Owe your country, but you're existing within a framework. That framework, for example, is Slovakia, and what you do in your life has an implication on that society, on that country. So you build a great company, you employ 100 Slovaks, 200 Slovaks, you employ 3 Slovaks, wonderful. You're serving the society, you're serving the country.
I've noticed something that's intrinsically unique to Slovak people, and this is as an observation. Everybody's a slight patriot in their own way, but every time I meet a Slovak who's lived abroad like you, there's this gravitational pull that brings everybody back. What do you think are the drivers for that?
I think it's just we've been waiting a long time to have our own country and to have our own sovereignty, our own independence. We were 30-something years old. We have an opportunity now, and I think that people just feel it in their DNA, in their genes.
I am delighted to be back with a brand new episode of Undiplomatic. I'm also happy to be moving away, albeit not entirely from politics, with my special guest today, Zuzana Palovic, an author, co-director of the Global Slovakia brand, a cheerleader for Slovak culture, and also vice president of the political party Mi Slovensko or My Slovensko. I'm not entirely sure how to say it, but Zuzana, many thanks for joining me here today. I hope you're well.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, actually, I'll start at the beginning because I think during the pandemic, I was following quite a lot of your stuff. And I think there was a time where everybody was captive at home. And to be honest, having lived here for a long time, I didn't really know so much about the culture of Slovakia. Knew a little bit about Cyril and Methodius, a little bit about Lučnica, a little bit from traveling around the country, which I've been fortunate to do so. But it wasn't something that really hit me or struck me as a foreigner. I followed your stuff closely, and it was always energetic, high level, well put together. So maybe give me a little bit of an introduction into who you are, what you're doing, and why we're here.
Okay, sure. So just really quickly, I was born in communist Czechoslovakia about 1 year before the revolution. My parents defected, so we went through the refugee camps in Austria before we were granted permission to land in Canada as immigrants. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. I was also a very good tennis player, high-performance athlete. I think it's a throwback to the Cold War era. My parents really seeing sports as a medium to get out of the country, get out of the Eastern Bloc, and achieve something extraordinary.
Was that your ticket out? Was it because you were good at sports, or you were just selected?
No. So I originally started actually doing gymnastics here, and then it moved on into tennis. And I lived between Canada and the U.S. So I used to train at the various academies in Florida before I went on to get a scholarship, NCAA Division I. I didn't go professional. I had some very serious injuries. So I did the collegiate route. From there, I was really curious to see the world. So I knew Slovakia and I knew Canada or North America. And then I wanted to see more of this planet and what it had to offer. So I spent most of my 20s actually traveling, living in different countries. I lived in South Korea, worked in South Korea, for example.
Interesting.
Eventually, I went back to higher education. I did my master's degree in migration studies, where I studied Slovak migration at the University of Amsterdam. They had an excellent program, actually an excellent school, highly recommended. And from there, I performed very well, and I got a scholarship to do my PhD in the United Kingdom. So I was at the University of Surrey. There, I studied more in detail Slovak migration, and I was specifically looking at migration or human mobility being a vehicle for knowledge transfer. So how to get key knowledge that was missing here in Slovakia because we were behind the Iron Curtain. You can, of course, learn it just through evolution or through education, but that takes time. You can actually, what fast track way is seeing is learning. So it's actually going into economies that are democratic or free market economies, capitalist economies like the United Kingdom, seeing how people operate, seeing how individualism operates, seeing how marketing works, and then coming back and applying it and teaching others. So that was fascinating. That actually brought me back to Slovakia in 2018. I founded Global Slovakia. with this kind of very broad mission of sharing Slovakia with the world, with my colleague and co-director Gabriela Beregaziova, who also I met in the United Kingdom. She was also on a very prestigious scholarship. And that's how we started. We started writing books, essentially just codifying Slovak history, trying to capture this complex history that happened here at the crossroads of Europe, putting it in the English language, putting it out in a format that's interesting for foreigners, so not overly detailed, but more like a story. And of course, in the English language, so global language that appeals to mass market. And since 2018, we've now released our 5th book. So we're growing. During the pandemic, that's when we really kicked off our online education, our webinars, our online academy. We have something like 13 courses. And that's when our following really grew. And, we've been building on that ever since.
Well, congratulations. So much to unpack there.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, first of all, I want to start. I'm very interested about this defecting stories. I hear most of them from people who no longer live in Slovakia, who've stayed in the places where they defected to. Do you remember that, or you must have been too young?
Actually, I have a very good memory of that. I don't know why. I think psychologists would say that it's not normal, but I specifically.
Who is anyway? Who is normal?
Yeah, well, I think they think with the mental development of a child and being able to retain that memory. But I retained that memory. I remember going through different kind of refugee camps, different centers before we settled in a let's say pension style. I remember my parents being high skilled and having quite a network of friends and support here in Slovakia. And once we were in Vienna or we were in Austria, that network obviously collapsed.
Yeah.
There was new people that came into our life that were very different from the people I was used to, my parents meeting with, which were usually artists and actors and creative types in Bratislava. My mother had to do a manual job in the beginning. She was cleaning bathrooms, cleaning homes. And my father, who was an air traffic controller at the airport here, he went into constructions. They were just trying to do,
make ends meet.
Illegal work to make ends meet. But eventually my mother actually transitioned very quickly to becoming an architect also in Austria.
Wow.
So that was a huge upgrade.
It's funny to think of defection. Everyone has this idea that it's really long, a far distance away, but Austria's just around the corner and yet light years away.
At that time, because it was the Iron Curtain, so it was illegal. And obviously if you defect, it was still a communist regime here. So there were consequences on our extended family, on my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. Thankfully, the regime fell fairly soon after we left. But my parents, we were, I think we were just transitioning into Canada at the time. They did not want to go back. So my mother was really focused and hell-bent, I would say, on leaving Europe behind, leaving Czechoslovakia behind and starting anew.
I can really see that. And what a place to go, Vancouver, Granville Island, one of my favorite places. Love Canada. Of all the places in the world that have a pretty liberal mindset and a really good welfare and state system and opportunities, it does get cold. I mean, you were exchanging one, maybe not Vancouver so much, but it's a cold place, Canada.
So Canada was a wonderful place to grow up, I have to say. It was a country that was used to receiving a lot of immigrants, also a lot of immigrants from the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
So a lot of people from Slavic Europe.
Did you have a community there?
We did. So we had there were the original emigres that came in 1968. So that was a huge wave of Czech and Slovaks. About 200,000 people that actually defected after the Warsaw Pact invasion. And then there was a slow trickling after that. So the sedentary community was a 68 crowd, but there was a lot of people from other Eastern European countries, Poles, Yugoslavs, etc. And they formed a community on the basis of cultural proximity and similar values. I remember the education system was extremely inclusive. I actually went through the French immersion program, so Canada was piloting that. So Canada was a wonderful, liberal, democratic country. It's changed, I would say, a lot.
I think the world's changed. Everybody has this romantic notion of what they feel that their country should be like. There's a real pro-patria sentiment coursing through Europe, coursing through America, coursing through the UK. And there's some extraordinary migration laws happening. There's that way that people who defect or people who are trying migrant routes into different countries are being treated in very inhospitable manners. So I don't think there's anywhere we can look that says, well, this is how we should be. I think the world's reaching a pretty critical time. And my honest, less than humble opinion is that the pandemic created this because we showed so much global solidarity. We were all unified because we were told to stay at home. We were told to behave one way. And now our retaliation 4 years later is unrest, civil unrest, political unrest. And I don't know how that's going to pan out in the future, but you see the amount of conflicts that are happening currently. It's high.
It is, I'm an expert in migration, so I'm a migration scholar. I also have the personal experience of being a refugee, an immigrant, also a returnee coming back to the homeland where I was born, Slovakia.
Was that always a plan?
I think it's just life somehow happened when we were, Gabrielle and I were doing our PhDs in the UK. That's when we started writing those first two books. And it wasn't exactly the vision to establish Global Slovakia and come back. It just happened ad hoc. The books were published. We realized, okay, that's great. It's not enough to just publish books when no one knows you. So we packaged the books as part of a greater mission, and that really took over our lives. We saw that there was a need, and this need is only growing. Also, thanks to a large population of Slovak descendants that are in the United States, also some in Canada, Argentina, but the bulk of them are in the U.S. For example, in the 1990 census, over 2 million Americans identified with having Slovak roots. So that was in 1990. So we can imagine, populations continue, the lineages grow. So
what do you think
the number has grown?
You're a migration specialist, as you say. What do you think the fixed amount is? The diaspora, Slovak direct diaspora, does that exceed the population of Slovakia or not globally?
No. So I would say it's about.
Because there's lots in America, there's lots in the UK, there's lots in Australia.
Descendants. So, we're looking at, I think official numbers are somewhere around 1.8 million, but that's not including that descendant population. It's more looking at the direct emigres and perhaps the strong communities that are in like Vojvodina, Serbia, where 40,000 Serbians identify with being Slovak, but it's not just that they have Slovak names or Slovak roots, but they actually speak the language. I had the privilege to visit that community. They go to Slovak schools, they learn in Slovak. You walk around the streets, you go to the pharmacy, you speak in Slovak. So it's remarkable that 7 generations later, they've maintained these ties.
Paint me a picture of what those communities, because I watch a lot of Netflix, or people don't watch television anymore, but we watch all these programs, and I've also lived in New York, and there was an extremely strong Polish community. They have schools, they have community centers, they have restaurants. They have all of these things that are built around their community, also in London as well, where obviously I'm from. But were there congregation areas for the Slovak community where you upheld these cultural rituals?
Certainly there was. The Cold War had played a very significant role in breaking those communities down. But in the beginning, especially at the cusp of the 19th or the transition of the 19th and 20th centuries, there was an American fever that took over the lands here. And 1/3 of our nation actually emigrated. So Slovakia had a population, we were part of Upper Hungary at that time. We had a population of around 2.2 million, and some 750,000 Slovaks at one point went abroad.
Wow.
Abroad, the main destination being the coal mines and steel mills of the northeast of the United States. Not all 750,000 stayed on. For example, my own great-grandfather, he went like this twice by boat. So he would travel, go up to the ports of Bremen, Germany, travel the transatlantic journey by steerage. That would take about 10 days. He came back and told his family he would see these giant big whales on the journey and such, and then work there, make money, and come back. But we know that in 1920, for example, there was a U.S. census, and there were something like, I believe the exact number is 620,000 Slovaks living in the United States at the time.
Wow.
So we see how huge that population was. So you can imagine if there's so many Slovaks moving to America at that time, they start to form communities, and the community really started to form when women started coming over.
Sure.
So originally the men, like my great-grandfather, they left with the intention to just make money and come back. But once they were there, they realized, it's not so easy to make money. Oh, maybe I can make a little bit more money. Oh, I'm feeling lonely. I don't like going to the pub every night and just drinking whiskey, and I'm in a state of stupor and going to sleep and repeating my work day. So they start bringing their wives over. Once the wives started coming over, sisters, cousins, etc., more women, single women started coming over.
Yeah.
The men there didn't have to go back to
the homeland,
or I don't know how they were, slipping my mind right now. how they referred to it, the old country. They don't need to go back to the old.
Oh, so the Italians refer to it that way.
Exactly. Old country. To get a wife, I can get a wife in New Jersey. She's working at the factories. And so once they started...
And they still stayed within their own community, with their own people.
They did, because once they started having children, they realized there were needs. Like, they wanted to build Slovak churches. They wanted to have Slovak schools. And before you knew it, there was a Slovak butcher, there was a Slovak accountant, there was a Slovak lawyer, there was a Slovak doctor. And so they didn't actually really need to learn English.
Which isn't great if you're for integration and
Which
assimilation.
isn't great. So it was very interesting to observe that the United States actually imposed immigration quotas on people from Eastern Europe, so mostly from Slavic countries, after the First World War, especially it was implemented from 1920 onwards, because they just realized we need time to integrate these communities, because there's so many of them, and they're essentially creating little Slovakias, little Polands, little Ruthenias. And so they imposed immigration restrictions, not with the intention for it to be decades long, but just to give that community time to assimilate. But then...
Smart.
Very smart. And it's necessary. And that's the thing with the migration crisis today. I fully acknowledge, even though I was a refugee as a child, was an immigrant, etc., I naturalized as a Canadian, I'm a dual citizen, I do see that countries have a right to control their borders. And at one point, when there's too much of a population that's not integrated, they can say, hey, we need to slow this down. We need to give time for this community to integrate, and that maybe takes 10 years, maybe more, maybe less, I don't know.
Well, I don't think anyone's got the answer to migration right, and I think the United States exploded after the Second World War in terms of industrial expansion. They needed people to travel. They became the hegemon, and only China's economic growth has ever mirrored or echoed anything close to what America looked like. Now Africa will take over.
Yes.
So they needed people to go and work, as much like the people that moved to the United Kingdom hundreds of years before also.
Very interestingly, they did need people, but they closed it to Eastern Europe, and they opened it to different pockets of the world. So they started to bring in more populations from Asia, etc. And that's when we see, actually, after World War II and the whole period of the Cold War, we see that breakdown of the Slovak community, because Czechoslovakia was part of the Soviet bloc. It was an enemy country. And the attitude was the same here. People, the Slovaks in America, were part of, the opponent regime. Yeah. So contact was really limited. And that Slovaks stopped speaking Slovak with their children. And that's what we saw, the real breakdown.
Well, one of the reasons we came to Slovakia and we didn't move to the United Kingdom was because my children didn't speak any Slovak. We could have chosen anywhere to go in the world, and it's an odd place for people. My friends always ask me, how's life in Slovenia? As everybody asks you, and I have to say Slovakia, and then they go Czechoslovakia, and I was like, no. There is that global ignorance and I can say that most people are genuinely ignorant, but it was a case of my children having to have a part of their identity be Slovak, and it wasn't imposed upon them, but if they were going to integrate with their family, they needed to speak the language. And when we arrived here, they didn't. Now they're 100% Slovensky, all of them, well, only two of them. And I think they very much appreciate being here for those reasons. So I understand the need to assimilate in different countries, but also losing your identity as generations pass is something that can be quite threatening. It may be that those generations of Slovaks that live in America, in the UK, or Australia, or hundreds of years ago, don't identify as Slovaks and just see themselves as Americans that have Slovak heritage.
Absolutely. I think that's actually very healthy. But what we're seeing is, and I think it's to the benefit of this country, Slovakia, is a revival.
Not Slovenia.
Not Slovenia. We are seeing a revival of interest in one's roots. We're seeing the population.
Why do you think that is? I've noticed something that's intrinsically unique to Slovak people. And this is as an observation, because I've traveled the world, I've lived in millions of places, and everybody's a slight patriot in their own way. I skirted on the word nationalist last time. I don't want to delve down that rabbit hole. But everyone's slightly patriotic and proud of where they come from. But every time I meet a Slovak who's lived abroad like you, who's earned money abroad, who's studied abroad, there's this gravitational pull that brings everybody back. What is this intangible that brings people? Is it family? Is it the hearth? Is it cultural? Is it emotional? What do you think are the drivers for that?
I think it's just we've been waiting a long time to have our own country. We've been waiting a long time to have our own sovereignty, our own independence. We're a very young country. We're 30-something years old. we have an opportunity now that our ancestors didn't have, and I think people just feel it in their DNA, in their genes. Now is the chance, and I'm proud. Slovakia has made it, wasn't assimilated into Hungarian culture when there was that pressure to do so, and now we have this opportunity, but we don't really know how to take advantage of it because we're not used to being a kingdom like, for example, the Czech Republic used to. We've never been.
Yeah.
So
do you think that's why they have a slightly different approach to things? I mean, we've had lots of people on my podcast speak about how the Slovaks tend to copy what the Czechs do. They watch them do things first and see if it works for them. Maybe they'll give it a go. But it's more a case of the Czechs being slightly more, I'm not going to say Western's the wrong word, but a little bit more open-minded and ambitious to certain things, willing to try and fail. Here I don't think there's that inherent desire to do that, and
so the Czech
a little bit more cautious.
Yeah, I mean, they had their own kingdom. They were integrated as part of the Habsburg Empire, so they had the Germanic influence. If you look at geographically, the Czech border is mostly next to the Germanic world.
I didn't even know that Karlovy Vary is also called Karlsbad. So it still has its German name still.
We were speaking Hungarian here, for example. They were speaking German in terms of the elites and the schooling system. And also
and there were name changes, right? So lots of Slovaks had Hungarian names, and then they changed after a while, which is why they have strange names that mean. I think my wife's surname means fly. There are surnames that her mother's maiden name is Boots, Sismarova and things like this. Very odd, peculiar names. In the UK, there were functional names, people who did jobs, Smith, locksmith, blacksmith, those kind of things. But there's some strange, maybe you can shed some light. I don't understand how the names evolved as well.
So I'm not an expert in that area, but I assume you carry the name of the craft that you carried. And that was something that was beautiful during the trade guilds and such. A father would pass on the skill set to his son, and his son would pass it on to his grandson, and so on. And through that practice...
Because quite a lot of people have surnames that mean something.
Yeah, and it was related to the craft that you did, and I guess you were identified by that in your community.
Lubos, does your name mean anything? No? Okay. Sorry.
But going back to the Czechs, so they're a little bit different. We have a similar culture and language, and they're certainly our brethren. And they're socioeconomically more advanced. They had more industry back in the times of the old empire. But they're also a lot more rational. Slovaks have... the Czechs actually refer to Slovaks as being very Balkan. We're very emotional. We have a certain sentimentality. And I think I would love for us to embrace that more. I feel it's very sad when we get quiet and we don't show our expression, because I think that's in our nature. And you see that more in the eastern part of the country, which is why I love going to Košice and Prešov and Michalovce and this part, and really coming into contact with what I feel is the Slovak spirit or the Slovak soul.
So coming back to what I asked you before I derailed you, unfortunately, was the idea of what brings people back here. All that wealth and opportunity, people don't understand, right? So the median salaries here are the lowest in the EU zone. Living here is pretty simple if you avoid bureaucracy. It's not a difficult place. It's exceptionally safe. It's not, obviously it's not the 90s. So as far as European cities concerned, Bratislava, for example, is not a terribly hard place to live. But the opportunities in, let's say, London or New York or Paris or Amsterdam or Madrid or Milan, where an advertising executive can earn 8,000 or 9,000 euros a month, a director level, that's something that a Slovak couldn't ever aspire to do here. And yes, little entrepreneurial industries exist, subsets of industries, but it's interesting to see that so many of these people who were earning vast amounts of money in these countries have moved back and bring their money back. What do you think? Is it just the family, or is it
I think it's
a pull, this gravitational pull?
Obviously, there's the pull of your mother language. You grew up speaking a language, and then you go abroad.
What's your mother language?
So that's a confusing junction, because I was born in Slovakia. My parents are Slovak. We spoke Slovak in the home.
Yeah.
But from the age of 5, I was raised in Canada. So I don't know how much linguistic development happens from 0 to 5.
Yeah.
And from 5 onwards, it's more evolved. So my whole education system was in English. And I think in English.
Yeah. Would you dream in multiple languages?
I think I would probably dream in English. Yeah. But being back here, you're seeing more of that infiltration of Slovak. And that's why I'm grateful to be living here, to reactivate some of that mother language.
So first language acquisition, 0 to 7.
0 to 5.
and second language acquisition from 0 to 11. After that, it's acquired learning. So we only have an 11-year window really to do linguistics.
Oh, really? Really?
Yes.
Oh, this is a fact. This is interesting.
Yes. And then after that, obviously you can become fluent, predicated on grammar rules and function. But when we're younger, our absorption is much higher because of, and this is really interesting, less fear of failure. So kids make loads of mistakes when they're learning languages. And yes, you can correct them, but it doesn't impact them. Right. Adults become more prone to societal pressures and are less willing to take risks in learning a language because they're feared of being judged while speaking. So your absorption rates go down the older you get. Fearless factor is something also we coach out of people in the professional environment. So I grew up in England. I'm obviously not, well, my heritage is complicated too, but I went to French school. So I my first school was French. And I dream multilingually.
Oh, wow.
Which can be confusing, but I also miss my native tongue. And going back to England, I miss the fact that people don't banter here. Yeah. It's not something, again, the Czechs have good banter. I ring up my colleagues in the Czech Republic or people we work with, less colleagues, and they're up for a laugh. Work is serious, but you can enjoy it as well. Here in Slovakia, do a little bit of teasing and stuff. People aren't used to it. No. I asked one guy the other day, did you get dressed in the dark? He said, no. He had a colorful shirt on. He said, no, I had the lights on. And he wasn't being genuinely ironic.
Yeah.
It actually is quite funny, but he didn't realize that. He was being sincere. So the banter thing doesn't exist here.
Yeah, I think that has to do, the banter culture, maybe that also comes with a certain level of socioeconomic development.
Sure.
You need to work
point.
with people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And you need to create a certain collegial environment. And I think here things are still taken quite seriously and intensely.
Yeah,
It's
super intense. I mean, coming from London where, Thursday is a Friday and a water cooler conversation is an absolute paramount. Here it's like, I'm going home to my family and that's it. And you offer people wine and beer, which is something that no one would pass up in England, and they want tea. There are some cultural nuances. Some are interesting and some are, but working is you earn your dollar or your euro or your koruna or whatever it is. You should also enjoy your time while you do it because you spend a lot of time there. But anyway, I'm sure in generations to come that will happen. I want to ask you one question, and it's related to this defecting thing, because for us, we watch James Bond movies, we see the Living Daylights, she defected. That's for us, for me, it was an absolutely fantastical notion. There is this fear. I mean, your family would definitely not want Slovakia to return to a communist environment. There are people who do. Why do you think that is? Is it stability or is it?
Well, there's always going to be a percentage of the population that has an affinity for that past. It was, we were communists for 41 years, and it certainly did benefit a portion of the population. It held another very important segment of the population behind. But when we're looking at the people that were, let's say, most impoverished in the society, they were benefited and it exalted them. It was a regime of the proletariat. Their whole branding was a hammer and a sickle. A hammer was for the worker and a sickle was for the farm workers. So, of course, there's going to be a segment that will remember that time and will maybe pass on that memory to their children, that this was a good regime and this benefited us and people like us.
It's interesting. So I find this fascinating because we were taught at school that it was the dictatorship of the proletariat. So it was like everybody's equal, but I'm the boss of your equality, which is definitely a contradiction in terms, just even in concept, right?
So obviously, communism was a concept that didn't live up to its promise.
In principle, it's not terrible.
Yeah, it didn't live up to its promise. But in general, this part of Europe, and especially I would say the Slavic lands or the Slavic countries, they're more collectivist in nature, and so they have a natural inclination to something that benefits the greater good or benefits all versus just the lone individual. In societies like England or America or Canada, we're programmed in a different way. It's all about the individual and individual achievement, and I did it on my own. And here it has there's a different value system.
Interesting that you said we when referring to Canada. So there's interesting there, the paradox that exists inside your mind is also obviously very interesting. What I want to know now is that you're older You're a seasoned, I'm not going to talk about your age because you're a lady, it shouldn't
No,
be done.
of course not.
But now you can see things objectively. You were that girl that traveled to through these camps, which is remarkable, I think, as an experience anyway.
Yeah.
That's something that can never be taken away from you. Then you grew up in these different environments and different systems. So now when you go back to Canada or we travel to the US, I think you were in the US recently, when you talk to people who don't know anything about Slovakia, how do you paint them a picture of what Slovakia is? What is the, you know, because the tropes and the stereotypes are always the same. It's this tireless image of the castle or the Tatras, and these are almost indented in people's minds. There's so much more to this country than Bratislava Castle and the Tatras and skiing and beautiful women. When you're going through your, I guess this is cultural diplomacy of sorts, when you're talking to people about your proud heritage and what you think of Slovakia, and where are the hooks? What are the angles? What are the Americans love angles and hooks.
Yeah, I think we just we take a deep dive into actual aspects of the history or the culture, because just speaking generally about it, you know, how can you catch people? So we either talk about some of the traditions we have here, the heritage people find fascinating. For example, the rites of passage we do at Easter time or Christmas time. Why do we make
whipping ladies
and
getting
with
paid
willow
for
whips?
it.
Where does it come from? Well, it's not just some fun practice. It has everything in this culture.
Depends how you do it.
Yeah. It has a deeper meaning. And so we explain that and people find that fascinating. Or the fact that we were an agrarian society for a very long time. It was thanks to actually communism that we started to become industrialized. And that was only as recently as the 1960s.
Interesting.
So we're a society that's gone through a lot of transition. I like to personally focus on how Slovakia is really at the crossroads of cultures or geopolitical views or civilizational outlooks. You know, I think this is a position we should claim more actively in our diplomacy, in our business, is that we are a meeting point where two very...
Do you think that's been not deployed effectively enough? I mean, we always, everyone's so critical. I find actually Slovaks are much more critical about themselves than others are. When you go outside of Europe and the people who know about Slovakia, people generally have nice things to say, I found. Generally, I like working with so-and-so at this company. I really enjoy my time here. These guys are great. Have you met so-and-so? There's a positive perception of how Slovak people are from the outside. From the inside, there's a huge amount of self-scrutiny, immense amount of self-criticism as well. I don't think that's productive.
It's really destructive. So there is an element of nihilism in the culture and in the mindset.
That's well put. A nihilistic culture.
I think we need to identify it explicitly and essentially contain it. This is not acceptable in this society.
Like a virus.
Like a virus, because it is a mental virus that is very self-destructive. And we can explain why this emerged. You know, we were the peasant nation. We were the farmhands. There were overlords from a different culture and language group that ruled over us and decided for us. We were not part of the decision-making process. It was not in their interest to see us rise into positions of power and compete with them over for land and resources. So there's a history why we think and behave the way we do. But now we're independent. We have our own country. Let's start to heal this. Let's contain it. Let's identify it. Let's contain it. Let's heal it and become more productive in our thinking.
Historical repression and suppression. Do you think how many generations will it be before those wounds have gone?
I think it can heal quite quickly. You know, I'm sure there's loads of psychological studies that say it takes X amount of generations. But I think we can heal it very quickly.
Coming back to America, and I'm focused. I don't know why exclusively, but I'm fascinated because it's such a big place.
Country, yeah.
It's a huge place.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've both lived there. And there was an Instagram video. There's a very famous Slovak baker in Barcelona whose name I don't remember offhand. And she went around offering free baked goods to anybody on the street who could identify the capital of Slovakia. Or she actually, and only 3 people answered correctly, and that's Europe, and they're in Barcelona. So there was a paucity of people able to identify Bratislava as the capital of Slovakia, which for me is a problem. When you're in America, in the vast expanse of America with the crazy mindsets that they have, and you're telling your stories, you said deep dive, they like sound bites. Americans love a concise, a one-pager. Give me a one-pager in Slovakia. What is that one pager? What are the highlight reels that you would put in? I mean, cultural nuance, agrarian, these are all scholarly points.
We're a country on the crossroads of two different civilizational outlooks. We're a country that has received its independence after one millennia of being under different regimes and different rulers that were of different ethnicity. We're learning what it's like. We're essentially a startup nation. We're learning what, not in the sense of Israel, literally being a nation of startups, but we're learning how to run our own country, how to have a government, how to brand ourselves, how to promote ourselves. We were behind.
How's that going? The branding and the promoting?
It's going a little bit painfully slow, I think, and I think in order to accelerate that messaging and do it more effectively, we need to employ more people that actually live abroad and live in societies that we're trying to message to. So to America or the United Kingdom, we need to employ people who understand that mindset, whether it's people like you or people like me that grew up in those societies. I think we can really be the cultural brokers or knowledge brokers.
Or the bridge.
The bridge, yeah.
Are there cultural institutes that you're aware of in around the world? That I know there's one in Paris.
Yeah, so there are Slovak institutes around the world. There's certainly the one you mentioned in Paris. I think that's one of the most effective ones. There's another one that was recently opened in Jerusalem. In Israel, we have one actually in Moscow. Obviously, that's a different situation now. But I presented there in Moscow at the Slovak Institute. We have one in Prague. So they're scattered around, but there isn't an overall vision in terms of what their role is. They bring in Slovak artists. They sometimes showcase Slovak art. But I think the branding of Slovakia and the communication of the Slovak story needs to be done on an even higher level.
Yeah, it's complicated because, you know, we've worked closely with people like Simon Anholt, who is...
I've met him, yeah.
So he's a good friend and someone that works exclusively on nation branding, and it's never about catchphrases. It's normally about touch points that there's a hexagonal approach to how a nation is perceived, and Slovakia is seen through a neighborly lens, decent people. In terms of packaging that and how you take that on the road, and if you see, I go to travel markets all around the world, and you see the Czechs have a huge stand, and they're extolling the virtues of the Czech Republic, and it's not just limited to the cultural tropes that we're used to, but it's more broad than that. There is, or there should be, much more done in this capacity. French and British institutes, language and Spanish and Italian. There are a lot of language-based cultural diplomacy tools at their disposal, university courses and so forth. This obviously, Slovakia is a very small country, compact.
Yeah, we don't have the same experience of, let's say, Great Britain. Great Britain's excellent at this, and especially having such a wide empire, and after it collapsed, establishing those British institutes and that offer English language learning, English language acquisition. And obviously that in itself is an entire influence operation. But
Yes.
Slovakia cannot compete at the levels of the big empires, let's say Britain, America, Russia, China. But we can position ourselves as being important in terms of being a junction or a gateway where two different worlds meet, where Westerners feel safe, where Easterners, let's say, feel safe, and they can come here to talk. So I think, or to do business, etc. So because I, from my understanding, I've traveled Ukraine, I've been to Russia. It's very foreign or uncomfortable for a lot of Westerners to go that far east into the Slavic lands. But somehow Czech, Slovakia, Poland is more familiar. Obviously, we're part of the European Union, NATO, and all that, all those structures. And Czechs are, as I said, they're much more rational, they're much more Western orientated. But Slovakia, we see also in the election results, we see on the perceptions on the conflict in Ukraine, it's very 50-50. So I think rather than being ashamed of that and trying to change how people think, I think we should work with that material and be like, wow, this is very interesting. We're really somewhere where two worlds meet. How unique is that?
It's interesting. I mean, yes, I've also traveled to Russia and Ukraine, and I've enjoyed my time in St. Petersburg, especially. Loved it there. Also in Ukraine, been to Kiev and Odessa. A big fan of both of those places. But geopolitically, this is a hotbed of activity around here, and the sympathies for Ukraine wane potentially, not with Poland, obviously. Where Donald Tusk made a pretty strong statement last week saying that there's absolutely no fatigue with the 50 billion euro plan, committed to carry on supporting Ukraine. But Slovakia as itself, you know, we see a lot of Ukrainian businessmen coming through our doors at the Council of Slovak Exporters, previously we had strong relationships with people who traded with Russia, and these are complicated times. The one thing that is being clouded is how businesses survive without being able to trade with one partner and being only allowed to trade exclusively with another through the sanctions regime. Yeah. From an identity perspective, I don't know how I'd go about branding Slovakia. And, people wouldn't take me seriously even if I gave them my suggestion because I'm an outsider.
It's authentic. It's natural. I think as a foreigner, it's something maybe you appreciate about Slovaks, that they don't put on airs. They don't have this pretense. They're very genuine. Maybe not as expressive as you would like or you're used to, but that has its charm as well. And also the fact that we've had this delayed industrialization. So a lot of stuff that's been vanished in the West, that's for generation been gone in the Great Britain, still exists here. Some of those values, those traditions. And I think that's what we're really seeing with our American following. That's what they're really appreciating about Slovakia, that this common sense, these values that have long eroded in the United States are still very natural here. We don't even need to exalt them as being our values. It's just part of everyday family values, everyday social life.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. In fact, my previous guest on the podcast, Luboš Blaha, obviously a very controversial and divisive figure, but we did agree on one thing, and is that he doesn't see that there should be need or pressure for Slovakia to follow an exclusively Western mindset, or even an Eastern one. He said we don't have to be a subjugated by Russia mentality, nor do we have to adopt the UK-US mindset either. And he didn't say it as eloquently, did he, Luboš? But there is a truth to that. I think it's an identity thing. It's like I can't put my finger on where Slovakia fills the void in the geopolitical landscape because I still don't know. But I am warned that there is a democratically elected government, and there are also protests about what that government is doing. That to me is the checks and balances of a functional democracy. We elected these people legitimately, and yet we're not happy with what we do. We take to the streets, and then we have parliament to decide whether or not these things should get passed or not. So you're going to get that 50% who aren't happy, and then you're going to get 50% who are. It's how Slovakia then wants to play a role within the region, and I think it should be done through communication. It should be done through more. I'd love everybody to speak English natively here. That would be a wonderful thing. German and Russian were historically the second languages, obvious, and Hungarian. And that's historical because of the proximity and the mindset. But, you see what Sweden and the Benelux countries benefited from having English adopted in their language systems. And it's not just me saying that.
Sure,
it's just a way to open doors that perhaps had been closed.
Absolutely. So then, English is a global language, and it would be very useful for our population to speak that. I think before we get to that stage where we can be like, I lived in the Netherlands, everyone's obviously Dutch native speaker, but they speak fluently English.
You don't have to worry there.
But they have a strong identity. And I think since we're such a young country, since we never had our own kingdom, we're coming into forming this national narrative. We're learning the tools how to do that. So we need to first form a solid base before we can really start playing on that global stage.
How long is that going to take?
Again, I don't think it needs to take forever. I think we just need to embrace our resources that we have. And part of our resources, of course, are our historians and our anthropologists here, our cultural experts here. But we also have a lot of people that are abroad that are very talented, that know the mindsets of those countries and those major destination markets like the United States. And we can work together to create a cohesive story. Because branding is essentially storytelling. And so we need to know how to put our history in check.
No one knows how to do that better than the Americans. They can take. We're pretty good at it too, but the selling stuff, Americans, they're really good. I've worked with. I used to work for a Canadian company as well, and storytelling was at the core focus of everything that we did. And you see the intrinsic value that has. If people don't, and that's why I say, what's the hook? Like the ice hockey puck, I think that's used in the NHL is made in Slovakia, and I don't know if that's. I don't know if that's 100% confirmed, but that I've been reliably informed that every single ice hockey puck that's used in the NHL is handmade by one place in Slovakia. That is a branding opportunity missed.
So we were a huge manufacturing hub, not now perhaps hockey cups, but before in the Cold War, it was a lot of artillery producing tanks. We obviously fed that off into the Soviet regime. I'm losing my voice.
Sorry, I won't keep you. You'll be here till next week.
No. But so that manufacturing, is a very important aspect of the Slovak economy that I think we were discussing earlier. It's really neglected, and that's something again we should champion. It's great. We have tech. Tech is very important. Thanks also to the Cold War, we have very good tech skill sets because social sciences were suppressed, so people weren't going, or it was not possible to study sociology. It was absolutely absurd because that's ideologically charged, so that was shut down, and so everyone who had a, let's say, mental capacity to go into higher education, they were channeled into these technologies, either engineering, medicine, or information technology.
At the Council of Slovak Exporters, we see every day we're at the coalface of industry, and we see the limitations that the relationship that is inextricably linked between state and private. It needs to flourish. There needs to be a better dialogue, and whether it's this administration or the next, I'm not really bothered how that works as long as it benefits business. Because I'm always of the opinion if there's more money in the country, there are more happy people. In fact, I forget the historian that said 2 holidays in a home. So the 3 H's. 2 holidays in a home. When your people can all afford 2 holidays and buy their own home, the politicians tend to dissolve into the ether. That note that that your system of governance is effective, but you're rich enough to enjoy the fruit of having your own house and going on a holiday twice a year. It's an archaic barometer, but there is a truth to it. If you are happy with cash in your money, then why should you care about who the state secretary in the Ministry of Sport is? You would not.
You would not care. And for now, we're at a stage. I mean, Slovakia is doing much better economically. I've really witnessed this transition, this country go through so many growth spurts, and also economically, you can see Bratislava is doing so well. People do have money. Of course, they want more. That's beautiful to see. But if you have an economically evolved society, they don't care so much about the politicians.
We're not quite there yet.
No, we're at the stage where politicians are still celebrities.
Yeah, which is alarming for many reasons. But I get it. It's also a part of the interesting tapestry of what life in Slovakia looks like, and state secretaries are exalted, to use a word that you used.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you hear the names, you hear their names. They're the ones that are playing out the drama for the collective. So
I think invest in tourism, invest in infrastructure, make Bratislava competitive with Vienna so that people don't need to travel to Vienna, invest in the airport. And a lot of this is investment, which is, again, it goes against a conservative, cautious, consolidatory mindset. That might not happen in this administration, might not happen in the next, but I'd like to see it happen eventually, that where Bratislava, certainly as a city, is comparable to Prague and to Vienna in terms of being a hub. It's more expensive to buy a place in Bratislava than in Prague. Now, let that sink in. The money's less, but it's more expensive to buy in Bratislava than Prague. How is that disconnect? And when people are earning less, how can it be that Prague, which, let's be honest, is infinitely more beautiful and historical, no disparagement here to Bratislava, but it is. Vienna is an entirely different kettle of fish. Their second largest trading partner is the United States. Without Germany and without the European Union, Slovakia doesn't have much of a GDP global outlook. Really, it's locked to EU. So any of these idiots that say Slovakia should leave the European Union, and I've heard them say it, are genuinely moronic, because the spine of the European Union is fueling industry here, which is absolutely critical. And Schengen, and the idea of someone being able to trade on the WTO for a Slovak entity is just absolutely farcical. But it needs to get to the stage where people are allowed or have the opportunity to earn that kind of money. And the minute they earn that kind of money, I promise you, even if you pay more tax, that's happy, treasury's full as well, then public infrastructure gets improved, then roads get improved. The mythical road between Košice and Slovakia and Bratislava gets built. The trains don't take 8 hours, 6 hours between Košice and Bratislava. These things would then improve automatically. We need to get there.
Yeah, so for sure, we need to improve infrastructure, but also the digital infrastructure in the country. So when you have to, for example, do something that has an interaction with the government, it's quite strenuous. You have to
Foreign
go to
police.
the
Tell me about it.
Foreign police is historically bad, horrific. I know they've improved, right, with the new location and
All the people there are very nice. Just the process is a little bit.
Yeah, it's very archaic. It feels like it takes you back to the times of
Feels like you're going to.
Austria-Hungary, the old empire. So we need to modernize. We need to make it more digital, and we can take actually examples from Great Britain. I find it fascinating that you can just renew your passport at home.
Yeah.
You stand behind a white wall, you take a picture, you upload it in the system. It's our fairly straightforward, and you get a new passport in the mail. And whenever I interact with the government, even through that chip system that we have, it's so complex. It's unnecessary complex, and I think that's where we need to bring in that different skill set, more of that right brain thinking, that just ease of transaction, ease of interacting through that digital space. And for being such a small country, and for being so, let's say, not economically developed, I find it fascinating how we overcomplicate the processes as if we were, the super Silicon Valley digital global empire. We're not. So things should reflect that. It should be simple and accessible to the people. So that's the foundation. We need to improve that digital infrastructure, and then I think things will build on that.
Like I always say, if I don't have to take my wife to an office to do something bureaucratic, then we've achieved something. Because still she has to come and interlocute. It's my bad for not learning Slovak, but it's not a terribly easy language.
But even as a Slovak speaker,
I'm glad you say this, so I'm off the hook.
Yeah, it's difficult, and the bureaucrats themselves are not quite familiar with the processes, and the processes are always changing. So I think just to systemize that would really help this country.
So I know we try. Everyone I've spoken to on my podcast, is one thing that is absolute apparent, is that everybody's so deeply patriotic, which is quite warming, because I'm sure if I could do this podcast in the UK and I was bringing someone from a think tank or someone from a cultural diplomacy background, they wouldn't be talking about Rishi and Keir. They'd be talking about the business landscape, liberal capitalist mindsets, or all the nonsense you see at TED Talks that drive people up the wall.
This is great.
Here I noticed that everybody here is deeply patriotic.
So that's where you see some of those Western values, or the Western socialization hasn't come here yet, because also thanks to the Iron Curtain, etc.
Yeah.
So we have a different civilizational outlook. We have different values, and it's still okay to be patriotic.
Absolutely.
In fact, it's necessary to.
It's dangerous to be nationalistic, though, I think.
But a healthy dose of patriotism is good, and you should have pride in the country you're born in. You should, because ultimately you're serving that country through your life. And I think in Canada, for example,
interesting use of word.
Canada or the United States. Or
Why did you choose the word serving? Servitude.
Well, like you not serving like a serf, but through your life, through your business.
So you believe you owe your country something in return just for being born?
Not owe your country, but you're existing within a framework. That framework, for example, is Slovakia, and what you do in your life has an implication on that society, on that country. So you build a great company, you employ 100 Slovaks, 200 Slovaks. You employ 3 Slovaks. Wonderful. You're serving the society. You're serving the country. Maybe you produce a product, chips, and those are exported to America or Brazil or China. You're serving that country by also serving. You're serving the Slovak brand by taking the products, bringing it to another tribe on a different part of the planet. They're consuming it. It's beautiful. Like there is a higher purpose to life. We're not just existing to make enough money to have shelter and hot water and electricity. We're obviously serving a higher purpose, and that's exciting for Slovakia at this time, because we're so new. It's a thrilling time for us. As I said, we never had the opportunity, and certainly not for millennia.
No, I was just interested in the use of word. I mean, obviously, I serve Slovakia quite well. In fact, I mentioned before that I deserve some kind of knighthood for services to the country, even though that's definitely not on the cards. As a result of this deep-rooted patriotism, as a result of Global Slovakia, as a result of your travels, you were in Korea, my wife also studied in Korea, you have a unique mindset. The outside world, not unique, you're not the only one, but you have a good perspective of what it's like to be traveled global, understand different mindsets, understand different governance models, understand different ways of life. You have political aspirations, and you are affiliated with a party. How did that come to you? Was it natural, or was it something that you thought this is something that I want to do. I want to be a parliamentarian. I have these goals for myself? Or was this something because you felt your country could benefit from your vast experience?
Well, I think it just came about organically somehow. I do want to be involved in Slovakia on a higher level in terms of vision, shaping the vision.
I can see the TED Talk now. Yeah.
of the country.
You just need a mic.
Yeah. And of course, I have a unique perspective because I left the country so young, and I've lived, on 4 different continents, 9 different countries. I've been exposed not just to the West, but also to the world. I would like to apply that knowledge in service to, for example, communicating the Slovak brand, helping to shape the national narrative of this country. Politically, I see that there is a need for people that have this global mindset, but that are also patriotic to step into that field, because we see often also maybe on the more liberal end, you have people that have a global mindset, but they're not so patriotic. In fact, maybe they think it's a little bit corny or it's outdated. And I think Slovakia really needs its protectors also. So I feel I fit a unique junction. Of course, it's just a humble attempt, and we're hoping that our support grows. Slovakia is a very complex political landscape. There's so many different parties, and power is really split between them. So we'll see how that journey evolves, but I'm learning a lot by being on that process.
Lubos and I were joking a little bit beforehand. We're allowed to joke, right, Lubos? That everybody wants to be a politician now in Slovakia, and I said it seems rather easy. I'm not for a minute diminishing your ambitions, but there is a sense to me that with this huge proliferation of millions of parties that are, and I mean, it's quite hard to keep up quite a lot of the time.
And I agree with you. And it is, I think that's the beautiful thing actually about Slovakia, that relatively speaking, it's very democratic.
Sure.
You have a vision, you want to establish your own party, you want to communicate that vision and gain votes, you can. It's accessible. I mean, doing that, for example, in the United States, you need tremendous lobby backing, financial backing to do that. And that's the cool thing.
I would argue that a bipartisan system is actually quite an effective model, and they have 370 million people. Imagine if there was proliferation in America.
It'd be very complex. So who knows, maybe that our political evolution will take us to there. But at this point, we are where we are, and it's a beautiful thing in terms of it being accessible to the wider public, and anyone essentially can create a party, yes.
And in terms of those political aspirations, is there an office you covet? Is there a seat you would like to have? Is there a role that you envisage yourself?
Let's omit that for now, because...
Come on, now you're being Slovak. You're being Slovak and not Canadian. You go back to your Canadian, you'd be very happy to be the individual, the American saying, I'm going to be the best of the best of the best, sir. And then the Slovaks being a little bit more reserved. Why not shout proudly, I want to be the next prime minister or the next minister of foreign affairs, or this is where I feel I can add the most amount of value to the country?
I think it's out of humility and respect for that ecosystem. I'm new to the game, and I don't want to overshoot my mark. I'm just coming in. I'm learning the process. It's been very difficult, my first election, but it's been...
So if my daughter asked me, Papa, can I be president? What would I tell her? Humility? No. I said, shoot for president, right? And if your daughter was born in America and she said, I wanted to be president, what would you tell her? You can be president, right? Mm-hmm. But here, you would say, no. Well, we have to go. Neviem, uvidíme.
At this point in time, I'm going to humbly bow out of this questioning.
I didn't get it. She did. See, you're ready to be a politician. You dodged the question. You should have answered the question with a question, and made me look like an idiot instead of me pressurizing you into telling me that you want to be the next president.
No need for that. I think there's room for grace in politics as well, and that's something also with Mi Slovensko, that we're a very centrist party. We're center left when it comes to social policies, but center right when it comes to economic policy, because we understand that a country cannot work without a solid economy and without government supporting business, because business generates the money that then the government uses to redistribute for social causes. So
I do think there's a lot of childish infighting that should be best not seen in modern day politics, and that's not exclusive to Slovakia, that's everywhere. a lot of mud being thrown around, a lot of personal attacks, a lot of, I mean, it's not new, but I think it becomes with social media amplified and it's much more visible. Once you say something, it's weaponized and it's immediately cut into different
And that makes me a little bit sad of just how big of a role politicians play in this society. And I think it has to do with the fact that we don't have, let's say, for example, in India, you know, people have the great mythology dramas to listen to, watch on television, and that's where they see their role models, not in their politicians. And in Slovakia, you know, we don't really have that gap filled yet. We don't really have our superheroes. So we, in a way, project a lot onto our politicians, and to some people, they do become their superheroes. And I think politicians don't serve that role, but at this point in evolution, I guess in Slovakia, they do. So they're the superstars.
I know I'd asked you, we're going to wrap up shortly because after a while, people start to lose their will to live on my podcast. But
no, we can keep going.
I asked you to prepare, or if you knew of any fun facts about Slovakia that maybe sound biteable, but you said there are far too many to distill. Was there anything that you thought, well, people might not know this about Slovakia, and you thought that would be a nice nugget?
I think I'm going to take it actually to a higher level.
You love this higher plane.
Yeah, a higher plane. I think we need to start viewing...
It's from your time in Amsterdam with all that contraband.
No, actually, you wouldn't believe it. I never actually tried that in Amsterdam.
What a waste of going to Amsterdam.
So basically, I think we need to start seeing, really valuing our human resources in Slovakia. So it's our people, Slovak and foreign, that can serve this country, because we seem to think we can just sell a country with our natural resources, and that's great. We do have a beautiful country. It's very green. We have some mountains, the Tatra Mountains, but that's not exceptional in terms of our neighborhood. And we really need to start seeing our human capital as being what's the asset that can promote this country, and supporting also our human capital. So excellence, identifying excellence, supporting excellence. So it's not really answering your question, but to take it down a notch, I think what makes this country exceptional are her people. And it's also her common people, which is why I love traveling Slovakia. I love going to the east. I love going to the regions, because being in contact with those people heals me. It heals something that's been lost, perhaps, in the West. And I think this is something that should be exalted and celebrated, is the salt of the earth essence of Slovakia.
I actually also really enjoy going to the east of the country. My wife's family are from Košice. Whenever I'm there, I really enjoy my time. It's funny, when people from Bratislava come with us, they can't wait to get back, which is, in fact, I've met so many people in Bratislava who've actually never been to Košice. It's like me saying I've never been to Edinburgh or Newcastle. I went to university in Edinburgh, but, you know, Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, I've been to all of these places as a matter of course, the English biggest cities. Yeah. And to turn around and say that you've never been to Košice and have lived in Bratislava all your life is just, to me, it's embarrassing. But I guess that's maybe the way some people are called. Do you think people should travel more within the country to get in touch with perhaps a more primal mindset? Salt of the earth, you mentioned, a little bit more roots, a little bit more basic, a little away from the rat race, a little bit more soft, perhaps. One day I'll get some fun facts about Slovakia. Maybe not from you, but from someone else.
I'm just trying to think of something that would be really interesting. But
think about what we could put in a reel. Now we have to think about going viral at the same time. There's always that pressure. What is reel worthy? Slovakia has the highest quota of beautiful women in a 3,000 kilometer radius. Definitely. Not sure we can put that in a reel.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I don't know. It's just, it's a beautiful country. It's a safe country. It's a historical country. It's a country that's coming into contact with its history and learning how to communicate it. It's an unknown country, also to its own native population. Come discover Slovakia with us. Help us discover Slovakia. Something along those lines, I think. There's not a lot of places on earth that are having this experience. So if you want to come to a place that's relatively safe, part of the Schengen, the EU, but at the same time experience a more primal essence of humanity or the Slavic world, a gateway into the Slavic world, then I think it's Slovakia.
And what a wonderful way to finish our conversation. I can't thank you enough, Zuzana Palovic. co-founder of the Global Slovakia brand, and I encourage all my listeners to get on. What's the website for?
Globalslovakia.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and now we just recently started TikTok.
TikTok I do as well. I don't really see the point, but someone told me that I had to. And you're also political aspirant with My Slovensko, centrist party with bridging the gap between the East and West. I think is a good idea. Author, so many strings to your bow. Zuzana Palovic, it's been absolute pleasure having you on Undiplomatic, and I wish you well in all your future endeavors.
Yeah, and likewise, thank you so much for this opportunity, and may you just continue to do this work. And if sometimes you feel that Slovaks don't really show their appreciation, I think just continue, because in the long run, you're really going to get it. These people will really hold you. So
thank you very much. Yes, the Slovak ambassador, as I'm ironically, well, not ironically, perhaps there's a real truth to that, is actually I'm getting quite a lot of support from that diaspora. Mm-hmm. So my biggest amount of people who really endorse my project are Slovaks from America and the UK. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I see the demographics spread, and it's a lot of female, not for any other reason, because I think it's the story you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. So there's steam being gathered, and the whole ambition that I have is similar to yours, perhaps in a different vein though, is to promote the idea of what can actually like to be in Slovakia at the coalface of all of these things, cultural, political, business, and the fusion of all of these things. And the feedback's been encouraging. Of course, there are haters, but you know, that's life. There are haters in my own house. So well, I'd expect that from an outside community even more. But yes, I think we share a vision. And I'm pleased you're more than welcome to come back in a year's time or in a few months' time, and we'll see how your journey's progressing too. Zuzana Palovic, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Undiplomatic podcast, brought to you by Hyatt-Khan.